welcome back to American Brandy with Binny's Beverage Depot. This is part 6. Are we on 6 now, I think?
Yes.
And thanks to some connections, we are joined by David Warter tonight. David is the distiller winemaker for Gallo. What's your official title, David?
Oh, I guess official title is Vice President of Winemaking and Distillation.
There you go. That's an important title. And you guys are making more brandy than probably anybody in North America, I would think, right?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
We're making a few million cases.
I was going to say, what is saying like the most? Like, what does that mean? What does that number look like?
It's basically a little bit north of 3 million cases when you put E&J and Argonaut and Germain Ribbon together.
For the year?
Yeah.
3 million 9-liter cases?
Yeah.
27 million liters?
Yeah.
I like it. And so Dan, that's roughly double what Dan makes.
In a day. Well, just for reference, so for people to reference, it's easy to reference if you want to reference to a Scotch brand that is, well, I mean, look, it's more than a million gallons. That's bigger than Glenlivet even right now, because I don't even think they're up running. Yeah.
There you go. All right, so we've covered brandy, we've covered whole fruit distillation, we've covered apple, we've covered eau de vie, we've covered, you know, kind of French style and stuff. So David, you just named a few different styles of brandy there. I don't know that we've talked to anybody else who's doing something huge in column, but also pot distilled and also so immensely French influenced as the Germain Ribbon line. Where do you want to start with this? I mean, how did you end up running a distillery of that size with something that specializes brandy?
Oh, how do I start? That's a fun question. I've been with Gallo for 22 years. I did my first couple of years in sales. Actually, I want to say thank you for inviting me on today, because I actually am a kid from the Chicago suburbs originally. And actually one of the first times I was deciding whether I was going to work for Gallo or not, I actually took a tour of a bunch of different stores and went through, and I'm almost sure I went into a Binny's. So I'm actually really, really excited to be here today. You know, my dad always is asking me, you know, like, okay, what should I be buying at Binny's? So it's I think he's probably on right now, because you're one of his favorite stores. So, but how did I get started on brandy? About let's see now. About 10 years ago, we actually at Gallo, we had our master distiller, Scott DeSalvo, who had been working for Gallo for, at that time, 37 years. He decided to retire, and his manager of the team, Carl Serpa, he had been working for Gallo for 38 and in the brandy department for 25. So he decided to retire at the same time. So that was, you know, just a few years, 62 years of brandy making experience that decided to retire. So they kind of, at the time I had been a winemaker already for over a decade, and they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, you've studied distillation before, haven't you? And I said, not at that scale, but yeah,
it's not the same. It's not apples to apples.
So I said, yeah, I'd love to learn. Unfortunately for me, you know, while Scott retired, he stayed on as he has stayed on to this day pretty much as a consultant for me, answering lots of questions and making sure we've got that continuity of what we were doing in 1975 when we launched E&J, all the way through to, you know, today, as we're trying to manage the 3 brands. And I'm fortunate enough that not only do I have Scott, but I also have Hubert Germain Ribbon, the namesake for Germain Ribbon, obviously. And he's another great consultant that I have. So we're a team of about 10 distillers, make a product other than brandy as well. But the 10 of us love to learn from our two very knowledgeable consultants, and make sure that we keep the tradition alive and well for the quality of these brands.
Excellent. Very cool. So, I mean, E&J, you're making, that stuff's coming off a column still, I assume, mostly. Or is there any pot that's still blended in that?
There is no pot still in E&J. E&J is 100% column distilled. I'd love to talk you through that process if you want, or whatever you guys want to focus on.
I mean, you've got some slides you want to share too. I don't know if you have an order you want to start in or what.
I think that, when I was listening to the shows earlier, you guys were talking about me talking about the difference in scale. Okay. So I was kind of wanted to talk about what is the commonality between the large scale and the small scale, and then what's way different, right? So I'll share a couple slides. I will see if I have the talent to do this correctly. I always I've been known to not necessarily do this well. So let's see if I can. Okay, are you guys seeing my slides yet or not?
Yep, it's up.
Okay. So let me see if I can do that. Okay, so the first slide, that is actually the Brandy House up in Napa. So I know that was mentioned by Dan, I believe a couple shows ago. That's on Main Street in Napa. So that's if the folks in the Chicagoland area want to come on out to Napa and go wine tasting, and we encourage them to also come on out and taste at the California Brandy House. If you want to learn any more about it, their website's at the bottom of the page down there, californiabrandyhouse.com.
Cool.
And then you guys had Mike talk about the history. We love talking about the history of California brandy. You guys covered off that it was made a lot of mission grapes. The actual fun stat that I wanted to share, in case you guys didn't know this, with the phylloxera issue that happened in France, actually in 1890, the Leland Stanford Sr., the former governor of California and the namesake of the university, or his son was the namesake of the university, actually made 1.7 million gallons of brandy that he shipped off to France.
Wow.
Because they didn't have any brandy because of the phylloxera issues. So that was actually a fun little stat that I could share. I know you guys did a lot more. I think the other fun stat to give you guys an idea of the history in the West Coast brandy is in 1784, 17 of the 21 California missions were actually not only making wine, but they were also making brandy.
So Dave, would some of that brandy, million plus gallons that went over in 1890, when you go to someone's distillery now and they've got things that have been sitting, just in glass, is there a potential that there's some California juice just still resting over in France?
I hear there's 100-year-old barrels over there. So at some point, if they're 120-year-old barrels, there wasn't much wine being produced in the late 1890s in France, from what I know of. So
that's really interesting.
And what would it have been? So what was it? Was it just classified as brandy? Would they have tried to classify it as Armagnac or Cognac or any of the appellations?
I do not. I've seen the records that he made that much. I have no idea what it was said to be on the other end of the sale. So.
Interesting. So if we see anything 1890, we should be suspect. Or we should be really excited. Great California brandy.
And and this is actually that golden age. That was from basically the 1890s to about 1920, right before we actually had two things, as you guys know, happen in the 20s. You ended up with the Great Depression, and actually you ended up with phylloxera in the United States, the Great Depression, combined with the issue with Prohibition, and pretty much there wasn't much of an industry.
Dave, let me take a step back, because I don't know, like that picture of those vineyards. That my geologist hat tells me that's Southern California producing those grapes, with those beautiful uprising, mountains in the background. Like, has Gallo had a footprint throughout the state, or has it always been located like in the regions where it is today?
These pictures predate Gallo, most definitely.
Okay.
And actually, when I told you about Leland Stanford, his biggest vineyard, actually, he had two large vineyards, one outside of Sacramento and one basically on top of where the university is today. So that might give you an idea of some of where Stanford's was. But you're the you're the former geology professor, Dan. If you say this is Southern California, I am not going to argue with you.
No. California just has such a rich tradition of grape growing everywhere from Temecula to, you know, as far north as you can really think of. And I think we forget about the huge range of geographic diversity that California has to offer for grape producers and brandy makers as well.
And there would have had to have been missions down there, right? I mean, they would have been making wine and everything. If they're growing grapes, they were probably making wine.
Oh yeah. Yeah, as I said,
Regardless
17 of the 21 missions were, I believe the San Gabriel was the first that made it, if I'm not mistaken. And then, you know, just a quick kind of the 1980s, we moved forward a little bit. That was when we talked about Dan, Hubert, RMS, a bunch of those distilleries started up, and that was really great. The cognac really started growing in the United States in the early 2000s, and now we've got a few craft distilleries in the United States making brandy, as you guys have covered real well so far. And then we've got our brands on the right there that I'll talk about as we move on. You know, I think that the reason we'll talk about the what brings flavors, in my perspective, to both small and large scale brandy. So I'll cover the left side. I think that my favorite part, and Dan touched on this a little bit in his presentation, my favorite part about making brandy is actually the freedom to innovate. The freedom, there isn't it's not a column still it's not, the beer column with the doubler on it that you go into 95% of the bourbon houses and you see that over and over again. We have a huge diversity of what is brandy, and I think that is partly you'll see in what we make as part of that diversity. So Argonaut, I'll touch on the E&J process, but what Argonaut is a blend of both column stilled and pot stilled, and when distillates from a series of different grapes. Gallo started distilling our own grapes back in 1973. The first lot that we ever bought was 1938. So we had a tradition and then we had brands that dated back to the 1960s. Late 60s, we had Eden Rock and Gallo Brandy, actually, as our two original brands that didn't work out quite like E&J did. So we had been laying down lots of brandy, but then in 1979, something really, it was a really cold growing season. Actually, the rains kind of started in September, from what I understand, in California. There wasn't much cab that year. That most people picked on the North Coast, but Giulio Gallo really believed in Sonoma. He actually jumped in his helicopter and started flying from vineyard to vineyard and asked the folks what would take to keep your grapes in the ground, and bought up all the Cabernet that he could from Sonoma to keep the vines in the ground. Did some of that on the Central Coast as well. And when you have underripe Cabernet Sauvignon, like somewhere about 17, 18 bricks, Giulio, who's a huge lover of brandy, said, "Let's distill it." And then people were like, "Well, what are you going to distill it for?" And he said, "Well, let's start aging it, and let's find a home for it when a home should be found." And actually, I'll show you around later with the barrel warehouse. I can show you the row of 79 brandy barrels that we still have.
Dan, have you tasted these? What are your feelings on these, Dan?
Oh, no, I have not tasted these in particular. I've tasted some of the old stuff from Argonaut that I was lucky enough for Dave to bring over, and it's really quite impressive in terms of the kind of classic way, I think, which it expresses like this very different aspect of California brandy. It's pretty impressive.
And what would David, what would the equipment have been at that time compared to what you're working on now?
The equipment back in the 79 harvest, that was distilled at both the Fresno and Livingston distilleries. Both those, that would have been 100% column distillation. Both those distilleries have been rebuilt since then. But they would have been basically 72-inch columns at both facilities, running 60 or 72-inch columns. Those diameter of the columns running running the product. And as I said, we made lots of brandy to try to make sure that the 79 cab found a home. And then, but it turned out so well that we basically decided every year since then to lay down varietal brandy. So we actually have pretty much a continuous string of varietal brandy from the early 1980s on a column side. And then we had some from a alembic side, because when we bought, I'll show you a facility later, but we bought the Mccall Distillery down in Sanger, California, and they had Mccall Distillers. We had bought their inventory and we were making that. We bought that inventory somewhere around and the facility somewhere in the early 2000s, 2001, if I remember correctly. And then we also and just within the last, in 2017, we bought the Germain Ribbon inventory. So we actually have inventory that dates back to the early days on the alembic side as well. So it's kind of fun to have a plethora of different California brandies dating back, 40, 45 years there, to be able to taste.
So David, sorry, I just and this is probably a dumb question. So has Gallo always distilled only using California grapes?
Have we distilled only using California grapes? Yes. We have on our E&J series, we have at times supplemented with some foreign supply when we didn't predict demand correctly. Just being brutally blunt, sometimes you have to, when you're predicting demand 4 years ahead of yourself, sometimes you miss. And there isn't really, as you guys said, there isn't really a place that we can go to buy a whole lot more. Mm-hmm. That's the good and the bad of being the biggest guy on the block.
And that's halfway why I asked, but also because this is Gallo is such a California name. It is such an American, this family history of production, all these things. So I know that a lot of you folks have been in agreement over establishing kind of California brandy as a category. And it's inadvertently, but also because it was really what you believed in, you've had this as a company, a very strong belief in California grown grape varieties. But it sounds like, except for when demand, completely outstripped what you could get out there.
Yeah, and as I said, we definitely still, even during that time, had belief in the as we always have, the uniqueness of California brandy. What makes it, as I said, distilled, the first picture on the slide on the left, distilled from California wine grapes. We truly mean California grapes. It's very important to us. We think that the flavor maturity that you can reach, the diversity of different growing areas, the weather. I mean, if you taste Pinot Noir from down in the San Lucia Highlands, down in the Monterey area, all the way up through Sonoma Coast, you taste way different Pinot Noirs. And California is not one little area. California is so large, and there's so many different grapes that you can get, and they distill all so much differently. So it's a lot of fun to be able to have the history of the material that we have, as well as we actually have a little 1 gallon still. So every single time we get sourced new grapes, or we have an idea of that tastes like a really interesting wine, what do you think it would be like if we distilled it? We have a little 10 gallon winery. We got we actually make about 500 lots in that 10 gallon winery. But some of those lots each year are for research wine, to be able to figure out what distills well from where, pick at what maturity, to be able to make the best brandy we think you can make in the world.
That actually ties perfectly into a question we just got from Jason. And he just says, a formal table vintner, how does the approach to viticulture differ when growing for brandy? Climate, yields, harvest time. So we touched on earlier we touched on different growing practices and what you would use, why all wine grapes grown for wine wouldn't be appropriate to make brandy with. So when you're getting wine grapes and talking about wine grapes, are they slightly different than what would be made in a traditional bottled wine?
Well, yeah, definitely. I would say there's probably more of a commonality between what's being made and put into sparkling wine. than there is than in your standard wines. So we make our E&J is primarily made out of French Columbard and white Zin, as an example, picked usually in the high teens, 17, 18, somewhere in that range. Our Argonaut series, when we're picking today,
for reference, if you're picked in the high teens, if you were going to make either a white Zinfandel or a still wine Columbard, where would you pick them?
The white Zin, I'd probably pick somewhere, somewhere between 17 and 19. So we're on the earlier end when we were at 16, 17 on our white Zin. The Columbard, if I'm going to make that as a dry wine, I would probably pick that closer to 20. So, we're definitely multiple bricks points below 19, 20. So we're multiple bricks points below. You get about a brick and a half a week where we're at. So we're picking a couple weeks before everybody else is. And then the last thing that I'll show you the whole warehouse, but the Argonaut, we have primarily aged in former bourbon barrels. We're also doing some work with wine barrels today, only white wine barrels. I think somebody mentioned they use some red wine barrels. I believe firmly in only using former white wine barrels, so you don't get the tannin kick that or some off notes you can get from red wine barrels. I'll talk about this, the real picture. So the made by hand, we're going to show you the picture of what it's like to distill at our Mccall Distillery. So all of Germain Ribbon is distilled in column pots, pot stills and lambic pot stills. But you guys know Hubert, at least a couple of you know Hubert. So I wanted to make sure you saw the picture of Hubert back from the archives that we got. So, it's really fun to get a chance to work with him, but he definitely does not any longer look like Hubert, and Ansley does not any longer look like this picture of Ansley. But those two guys, I believe, very, very early in the process.
And you all three look the same.
I think I definitely differ with Dave's interpretation of what Ainsley, Hubert, and maybe even myself look like these days.
It's a great photo.
So this is actually the fun thing to talk about when we talk about our Mccall Distillery. So this is in Sanger, California. I think most people look at this picture and they don't think, I bet that is in the middle of the Central Valley of California. They look at it usually and think, well, those look like French pot stills. And the answer is yes. We had the Prulho, Mr. Prulho come on over and design, or actually we didn't at the time, the Centauri company had him come on over and design 20 pot stills. And these are 2,500 liter pots. And you can see the mushroom design on the top right. And maybe, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but if so, that's the design of that ends up kind of dictating some of the reflux characteristics you might get. And then you see our condensers on the left side. And I think that you guys talked about size. How does size differ? When you're doing pot distillations, we do every cut by taste. Every cut. There isn't a formula where it's like, oh, okay, we're at this size, and you just assume that every pot's the same, and you just wait for temperature 132 and No, we're literally every pot we're running, we're tasting it and making sure the head cut is right, the heart's cut is absolutely right, and you make sure that second cut right before that bitterness really kicks in is done. We have distillers on site. We run the facility during harvest 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. And as a result, we've got distillers on site 24 hours a day, and making sure that, they know that their job is to really not miss a single cut throughout the whole process. And it's very hands-on. When I say cut, that means you're changing the valves from one leg of the distillation to the next leg. So from the heads to the hearts, from the hearts to the seconds, from the seconds to the tails if you're taking tails. We actually don't take tails. So that was something else that was mentioned earlier, at the different French styles and different. We do. We definitely don't do the Martell method that Dan mentioned. We are much more in between the Remy method and oh, come on, why am I drawing a quick blank, Dan? Help me out. Fantasy method. Thank you. Sorry.
So now I get to be a nerd. And this is an honest question. The original Germain Ribbon still had a Chauvin, like a Remy style still, and Mccall is set up more Hennessy style. Do you notice a difference between the eau de vies that are coming off? I mean, they're both gorgeous, right? But you don't have the Chauvin in Sanger. Is that making a difference in the style?
You know, I would. I've tasted the distillates. I mean, Hubert was nice enough to leave us with, I think it was two different pallets of distillate samples from 30 years. So it gives us some reference points. I know we've had Hubert on site, and he's definitely worked with us on trying to alter our distillation regime, how much gas we're putting on at any given point, in order to try to make sure that we're getting what is the classic style that he really helped found with his distillery back in the early 80s.
Can I ask maybe a stupid question? Those are the most seemingly ludicrously long swan necks coming off of a still I think I've ever seen.
Line arms, yeah.
Line arms, yeah. So that like vapor is going all the way up there and traveling across the room to the condenser. What was the thought behind that they had to put why not just put the condenser right next to the still where you normally see it?
Pat, that's a fantastic question. That's one that I just don't know the answer.
I mean, it's getting more copper contact as it flows through, I guess.
I was going to say, I think it's copper contact, and it naturally would start cooling. Like it's going to go through this cool room that's like far away from there. This really adds to this kind of like evil Dr. Lair vibe. Is like you could have like the laser shooting sharks in the tank in the middle.
I was going to bring that up really just because the ancient looking computer kiosks over
they
on
look
the
very
side of the stills. They've got a very like Bond layer type of look to them.
So the facility was built in the late 80s, and they actually still have the same pictures on there. We actually had to update the computer electronics 3 years ago because, let me put it this way. The Atari that you might have grown up playing or seen in some sort of old shop had more intelligence than these systems did. So, we definitely were struggling with some gremlins and finding parts to actually to replace all these things with. So we kind of took out the old computer, the old PLC, and then put some new stuff in there. So that way, but what's fun is you walk up and it's still the same interface as it was in the 80s. So you definitely feel like you're stepping into a different time, not as early as the Lairds, most definitely. Don't get me wrong, but it's a different time.
So David, that facility at Mccall is running 24/7, like you said, during harvest. What's a typical distilling season then for you? When do you start and when do you finish?
Actually, I was going to talk about the source of brandy flavor, and actually, I was going to talk about one of the things that we believe very much in for all of our distillates. So I'll answer your question. We basically distill from October and late September, October, and then into early November, and then the rest of the time that facility is shut down. Why? Wow. Because we really believe in the freshness of distilling a very fresh product. We distill all of our material within 60 days of the end of fermentation. That's our goal, and we have actually made that goal every year since I've been distilling. So, nice. So you look at this sources of brandy flavor. Obviously, we've talked about grapes. I'll just give you real quickly a rundown. Our Germain Ribbon. Germain Ribbon is generally the XO is Pinot Noir and Semillon as your primary two varieties in that, and then with a little Riesling and in there in our Germain Ribbon core SKU. That is more of French Columbard, Sauvignon Blanc, with a little bit of more of the Riesling and hints of some Gewürztraminer in certain blends, and a little bit of, why am I drawing a quick blank, Viognier. That's another key one that we have in there. And then I'll kind of walk you through, actually, the others I don't have to walk you through, because if you want to know what's in a bottle of Argonaut, I'm going to see if you can see this okay, but we have a tic-tac-toe board on the back of every bottle. So on the back of every bottle, it tells you exactly what grape it was, how that grape was distilled, how many years in barrel it was, and what percentage of the blend it is. So, I mean, when you talk about, just trying to be as, as transparent as we can be to the consumer, we want them to know, so they don't have to go hunt down on our website. You can find our Germain Ribbon stuff on our website, but on the Argonaut bottle, you see it in every lot. We actually have to reprint those labels in order to be able to make it, so we have the right
David,
combination.
have you ever had pushback from the TTB or anything on that? Because we see that a lot in different countries, where it's like the more transparent people try to be. I know that we've got friends who've gone through that for their mezcal in Mexico, or like John Glazer with Compass Box in Scotland. It's like have you run into that at all? Or they're like, if you want to reprint the labels, like, have fun.
They were very, very particular of what we could and what we couldn't do. So let me see if I can be clear. They're okay with us doing the tic-tac-toe board. At one point back when we did a different E&J line, where we did some E&J premium, actually pot distilled E&J, we actually tried doing a single vintage release, and that was no bueno to the TTB. Won't let us do the appellation calling out or vintage calling out on the front label, but they would let us on the back label talk about exactly what we talked about. Those are things that they regulate, so they were okay with us using those exact things. What percentage of the blend is it? What varietal is it? How many years in barrel is it? So that way you can substantiate any sort of barrel claim.
Which is, coming from me, like, I actually take the opposite tack and want to make the labels as opaque as humanly possible. So actually to draw people into this layer, so they actually have to come visit to learn what actually goes on. But beside that, like, the notion that the TTB somehow would restrict you from putting the vintage, the appellation, and the varietal on the front label, really should tell consumers that a lot of times, like, it's not the producer that's trying to be opaque. No, me for sure. But like, even with Gallo, like, trying to be as upfront as humanly possible with what's actually being done. And our regulatory agencies in many cases are an impediment to that. Like, I would love to see an Argonaut bottle with the appellation and the varietal and a vintage date on the front. I think it would be gorgeous. Brandy needs it.
Good point.
So I think I went through and talked about the grapes. We talked about when you pick them. The one thing I did call out is basically every grape in Germain Ribbon history up until we bought it. Honestly, when I asked Hubert, he said all of it came from Mendocino. So when I tell you that it was Mendocino grape, that's to the best of all the records that we've ever seen. So the next couple of things are what I really wanted to talk about, what is unique about small scale and large scale. So for me, fruit prep, meaning and fermentation, meaning how do you get the juice ready for ferment, and how do you get the fermentation that you want? This is the commonality. To me, good winemaking is a key to good brandy making. And that means you have to really do fundamental. You've got to have low solids ferment. You really want to let those fruit notes come on through. The low solids will end up producing the total fusel oil that you're generating, which should make it so you can do other things to play up the amount of burn that you might have in your final product. But it really that's a key element to really make sure that you're picking you're working on some of the best fruit forward grapes in all of the world, you really want that to show. That's why I really believe in the clean winemaking. And then we definitely have a yeast that you commercially can buy, but we've done a lot of yeast trials, and we really feel there's a couple that are really important to use. Really cool fermentations in the low 60s, high 50s, low 60s. And then where it differs on scale is the distillation. So, our smaller brands, our more premium brands, they, as I said, the Germain Ribbon is completely in alembic pot stills, small alembic pot stills, double distilled Chianti stills. Our Argonaut is in those same pot stills, a combination of pot and smaller columns. While our E&J, they're on some large columns. In order to be able to get through 3 million cases in less than 60 days, we end up distilling. I gave Pat the number. It's actually on my slide further down. I'll show it to you real fast.
So the winemaking, so even for E&J, the winemaking practices are still the same.
Yeah, E&J, winemaking. The beautiful thing of working for Gallo is we believe we're a winery and a distillery, but as a winery, that means we have the resources to employ the best winemaking practices that we fundamentally know across every single gallon that we have, so that we do that for our brandy grapes, just like we do for all of our wine grapes. The freshness of the distillate, if you're wondering how you can pull that off, I do not have any friends at Brown-Forman, so I'm not pulling out exactly what the columns can do. I said this is approximately how many PGs would go through a continuous column, the sizes that Jack Daniel's has. They've had a couple articles published the size of their stills. And I said, well, here's how many PGs a day they could make. Here's how many PGs a day, proof gallons, we can make a day in our Fresno Distillery. So we're actually able to make more proof gallons than Jack can every day. But why is that important? Because in order to get through 3 million cases in 60 days, you need to be able to do that. Jack Daniel's has all year to get through, golly, whatever Jack is at this point, 15, how many millions of cases is Jack at this point?
I haven't known anymore.
Right. That looks like Girvan. There's a big grain facility in Scotland that produces grain for everybody. Primarily, it's owned by the Grant family who make Grant's blends, and that looks like that looks like Girvan.
Yeah, that was our Fresno. That's our Fresno Distillery. We actually have a couple smaller stills there, so that's what the Argonauts on. But the big ones up front, that's where that's where the E&J ends up. And then the other thing that's different that you can do differently, the proof of your distillate is also something that also can be the factor of how much flavor and what types of flavors you get, especially on a column still. You're trying to dial that in. We'll dial in a slightly different proof on our E&J than we will on our Argonaut, because we're expecting to age our Argonaut longer. So that means you can have a little bit more of the esters. Once again, we do the winemaking so that way we can get the esters we want. But then we also need to make sure there's you'll do a different proof because you're having different time expectations for how much esterification you're going to get. Esterification is turning basically the fusel alcohols to fusel esters, fatty acid esters, depending on what you're looking at. And that occurs in an acid medium over time with a little bit of oxygen, i.e. sitting in a barrel. So
I have a question here. So most of the time, I think classically when we think of column stills, people think of like running them full out to make vodka at 192 proof. This is obviously not that. There's a lot more care in this. The organic material that you're using is much more expensive, and this is all going to be for some level of maturation. So really, then is it all just like run? This is a dumb way to put it, at like a slower, lower level, or is it like you're still going to get a bunch of spirit coming off at 192, and then you're adding water to it to get it down to barrel proof?
Oh golly, no. First of all, you can't distill above 170 and still call it brandy. So that's like TTB rule number one. It has to be
sort of like bourbon. I mean, bourbon's 160,
right.
But yeah, the same standard for.
So yeah, we would have to be neutral brandy if we were above 170. But the unique thing on our stills, we actually happen to work with a tequila distiller, and we do the same thing on our tequila distilleries, is we actually have a draw point at every tray. So traditionally on vodka distillation, you'd take off the absolute top, the most neutral part, 190, 192, 193 proof. And when we're making neutral grape spirits to add to wine, we'll do the same thing. So like if we make a spirit to add to a port type of thing. But if we were, when we're making brandy, we're usually right in the 145 to 155 range, depending on what product we're making, meaning what brand is it going to, as well as what is the wine raw material feed. So our French Columbards, our whites, we tend to find we can distill at a lower proof than our reds. Our reds actually have a red fruit that we make in a blush style, so minimal skin contact, but still there's enough that we find that we alter the proof up just a few points in order to be able to get the right mouthfeel, the right oiliness, texture, and balance that you're looking for. We find that's pretty consistent for most of our distilling a white grape versus distilling a red grape on a column still.
That's awesome.
So as a side question on distillation from our friend Melanie, who is Machu Picchu, is asked, as Hubert is a proponent of slow distillation, have you changed anything, or alternately, what time are you taking for a run on the pot stills?
Well, what time are we taking for a run on our pot stills?
Yeah, have you changed? Yeah, in other words, have you changed distillation regimen on the pot stills specifically to account for Germain Ribbon, or are you just running a procedure? Or Dan, maybe you can say that better.
Dave.
I understand your question. I'd be happy to field it. But to answer the question,
no. I'm trying to get the question asked better. Sorry, it's not the answer. I'm trying to get the question asked better. But go ahead.
So what we do on our Germain Ribbon at this point, we actually had Hubert come in, and to your point, we lowered all of we had a traditional methodology that we had inherited from Centauri days when it was the Mccall Distillery, and we pretty much almost across the board halved almost all the gas feeds. We went from having we did that so rare, so it's a bunch of years back now. So I have to think. I think our average first distillation back then was probably 4 to 5 hours. Our second distillation, I think, was 8 hours. Now our first distillation is closer to 8 hours. Our second distillation is closer to 12 hours.
Okay.
But what I was going to say was Hubert is a strong proponent of slow distillation, but not in the context necessarily of the speed of distillation, in the context of slow food. And I think that what Gallo's doing now with varietal winemaking, utilizing classic pot stills for Germain Ribbon, is really a continuation of that notion of slow distillation, but in the broader sense that Hubert uses the term.
So I think we're going to talk cellaring and blending. I'll show you around the whole facility real fast. Nice. So the winemaking, just because I wanted to talk, we talked about the grapes we use. We do a lot of mechanical harvesting. I won't tell you differently. It gets us through the fields and to the winery. That's us dumping some grapes in a grape pit. That's us pressing it in the press in the bottom left. And then this is the key part that I really believe in, that was not a key tenet in a lot of folks that make the brandy. The solids handling is not something that they believe quite in as much as we do. That really emphasize the beauty of California fruit coming through great solids handling. This is actually called a flotation unit, where you float the solids up to the top and actually vacuum the solids out, and the liquid that comes off the bottom is like you can read a newspaper through it. It's really, really cool. And then really slow temperature controlled fermentations, as I say, in the high 50s, low 60s, really keep that fermentation going. Our fermentations can take 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that.
Dave, were those the fermentation vessels? Are those jacketed, insulated?
Depending on our facility, we do have, if the facility was basically, our rule of thumb, if the facility at Gallo is built after about 1990, yes, they're jacketed. Before the 90s, very few jacketed, externally chilled refrigeration. That works plenty fine on a white, that's a little bit different on reds, but we don't do.
Say in that time of the year too, like all that probably makes a lot of sense.
Well,
Just to be
you
clear,
control by pitch temperature. You can control some temperature somewhat by pitch temperature.
At the scale we're at, you definitely have to make sure that you have a lot of temperature control, because we're only pitching basically 1% of the volume as our starter. So you've got to make sure you've really chilled your grapes down. And remember, if we're picking in California as early as we are, one of the challenges is you got to night pick. You got to, if we're picking in late July or early August, throughout all of California, those are some warm time periods. Yes, it gets cold at night in the coast and the coastal areas, but it doesn't get frigidly cold. And if we're trying to ferment at 55, it's definitely not 55 a lot of those nights. We can be picking fruit, and in order to pick the fruit throughout the time period we need to pick it, we can get some fruit, some liquid that can come in the 60s and the 70s. So one of the other things we have is we have a lot of temperature control way up front. We try to send it through must chillers to try to really make sure as early as we can we get as cold as possible, so that way we have the ability to control what's going on versus a bunch of wild yeast going, woohoo, party time. So that's not necessarily what we want going on, because then you can have some wild MLs and some other things that really affect the flavor and mouthfeel of the distillate that you get later.
I've never heard musk chiller before, but I think we need one for our office, Brett, because it gets a little warm in there sometimes. David, quick question on the solids. Just to emphasize the point again, you removed the solids because it emphasizes more of the fruit character in the brandy post distillation.
Yeah. So the thing yeast, if they're fermented in the presence of high solids or at high temperatures, they'll actually produce greater fusel oils, and the fusel oils that they produce tend to be the fusel oils that make it so that way the fruit expression is lower. They end up being the type of fusel oils that you actually don't want in any of your products, whether it be wine or brandy. The only time I recommend those sorts of fusels is they work well in red wines that are aged after long periods of time, but it's not the right combo for white wine making or for brandy making.
Got it.
I thought the discussion that you all had both with Dan as well as with Copper and King on blending, with Brandon, was fantastic. I'll love to field any questions, especially you'll see discussions about feds and boisés on there. If people want to talk about what feds and boisés are, you guys already talked about what feds were to a degree. Although Dan had other French term for it. What was your term, Dan?
Petio.
Yeah.
But feb is.
I didn't know that's how you spelled feb.
Weak.
Fib. That's that's all I'm gonna say next time I'm in French. Feb. I'm going to say it to people on the street.
Just look at people and say Feb and point at them.
See how many friends I make.
Okay. Well, that was actually all the slides that I wanted to show. So no point to keep looking at slides when you guys can, we can just kind of make it a little more us talking to each other. So, but that was, that's what I wanted to kind of show. If you guys want, as I said, I can show you around the barrel warehouse or whatever you guys want to, questions for me, whatever you want to go next.
Barrel warehouse would be cool if you want to point out maybe a couple of differences in what you're doing there. And maybe, do you have, I'm sure you know in advance that a column still distillate is going to be better for barrel type A versus B versus C, or is that something that you're kind of always still learning something new about?
I'm pausing because I'm trying to think of how to, it definitely, you are correct as the general rule of thumb. But we also would say the varietal choice also is very, very important because, for instance, like a Semillon that has a lot of oily characteristics, it can take a different barreling no matter how it was distilled than, let's say, a French Columbard, which is much lighter, much more. You're looking for a different balance point, which is all those are different than the Pinot Noir that's got the beautiful red notes and a little bit more mouthfeel even than the French Columbard, but not the oily nature of the Semillon. The florals, they're their own camp as far as what the right regime is. So I'll just start talking about the barrels that are behind me. These are actually fun barrels. The fun story about these is Hubert. Hubert's family was fifth generation distillers from Cognac. And he actually brought those barrels over from France. So the barrels themselves are actually in excess of 100 years old. So I'm just trying to figure out how so that's the darker barrel on the top, lighter barrel on the bottom, not the same thing. But you can see we put our blends back in the barrel after we put the blends together because we try to have a year of marrying after we blend everything in order to try to really get that spirit to come together in barrel, because it comes together much better in barrel than it does in bottles, our opinion.
Dave, too, like we were talking about some of the things coming off the column stills at 130, 140. Is there are you barreling the different brandies? Is it by grape varietal or is it by intended brand? Like, are you barreling them at different proofs?
You actually read one of those slides. I didn't cover that because I didn't know if you guys wanted me to talk about that, but I love talking about that.
You do your best, David. I believe in you.
So this is a point where Hubert and I actually have a disagreement. I'll tell you that ahead of time.
Okay.
He definitely loves to start at 140 and to let the humidity of he likes to have a barrel warehouse that practically has standing water on the floor. And it's so humid that the proof will go down. What we try to do is we try to keep humidity that's keeps that proof much more even. So we're in control of where the proof goes next. If I wanted the proof to go down, I would try to pump it out to a tank and try to figure out how to get the proof to go where I want it to go next, right? So we did Gallo throughout the mid 80s, did a lot of work on what proof to barrel at. And we started I think the research started at 140 and went all the way down to 90 and tried barreling out at every 5 proof. And when I say, we do have 275,000 barrels at the time. They didn't have quite as many, but they were trying to do a 20 barrels at each proof for a couple different vintages. And as a result, they very consistently found a sweet spot right in that 110 range, which is kind of, I think, always mispronounced the way I'm supposed to say it. Mictors, if I'm not,
is it? That's right.
Did I say it correctly?
Yeah.
I know Mictors, I believe, is at 107 is what they're calling it.
Yep.
We found a very, very similar to their research is that for us, that's where we think the barrel is basically at its sweet spot as far as when we first go into barrel. And then we keep it there on the Germain Ribbon, we are putting into new French oak. When I get back to the other end, I'll show you the new barrels, but new French oak, and we'll keep it in new French oak for about, somewhere about a year. And then what we'll do is we'll move it to a much more neutral oak. So not all the 100-year-old barrels, but we have a lot of barrels around here that are 20 and 30 years old. So those are fairly neutral. And then for the Argonaut series, as I said, we have some that is going into basically our French oak, our what we call our cognacs. That's both the size, it's more reference to the size of the barrels, but our cognacs are actually all French oak. We'll take a majority of it actually has historically gone into bourbon barrels. And it's our belief on bourbon barrels is I remember Brandon's discussion of he's really looking for that first use bourbon barrel to really express the bourbon in his brandy. We actually love for our premium quality liquid, we love the second and third use. all the way into the fourth use. Those are some real sweet spots of really getting the oak lactones have really been extracted a lot already, and you end up getting some more of the vanilla notes coming on through and a much softer tannin. So that's what we really enjoy when what we're looking for when we're using our bourbon barrels. And then we do have, as I said, we do have some wine barrels. And with the wine barrels, once again, they're usually been used by either twice or three fills by the winery, and the winery being our winery. So we know exactly what was in them. And what we do with those is we actually, we rinse out the lees character. And then we use, once we do that, then we get a beautiful, once again, French oak that has actually had much of the bitter notes, because the bitter notes are smaller tannins that are actually pretty water soluble. The wine guys are doing a good job of taking that all out for us. So we're like, thanks guys. And we actually find that once again, that's a really good, that second usage of the wine barrel or the usage after we've rinsed it is just a really great sweet spot as far as getting that beautiful round tannin with vanilla characteristics coming through. So as you can see, I've been walking. I'm not trying to, hopefully I'm not making anyone dizzy. I'm just trying to give you guys a sense of the size of the warehouse, and the fact that we're constantly buying the barrels and trying to figure out how to do our aging correctly. We actually
how many barrels are under your purview now in this one warehouse versus everywhere else you have barrels?
Our premium warehouse is about 3,000 to 3,500 right now.
Okay.
So that can kind of give you guys a sense of where we're at. I told you I'd show you the. So here's our here's one of those fun barrels that has our. Let's see if I tilt this correctly. There's our 79.
Oh wow.
So this is actually entire row here. It's our 79 cab in the front. Except
what's on the end of the barrel is shiny. The end of the barrel is shiny. Has it been finished or what's?
Is it like lacquered, or is it just like a?
In that particular case, we did actually did a food grade paint to make sure that barrel was completely sealed up. Not all the barrels are that way, but a couple of the barrels, if we get leakers at the end, we'll put a food grade seal on it. That's
just too valuable. At 40
I'm good with the angels getting the stuff that goes through the oak. I'm not good with the angels getting the stuff that literally goes between the staves. That's not good.
And I like a food grade seal a lot better than gum that you just put on it every time you go by, because that looks better.
So
well, and are you doing any temperature or any climate control in there, or is that all ambient temperature?
Oh no, this is temperature controlled and humidity controlled. As I mentioned before, we're the highest this gets all year is about 63 degrees. That's what we're targeting. We target between 63, probably may get up to 65. Now I think of our temperature chart. We target 63, and then during the winter it will cool off more than that. It will probably get into the low 50s in here.
So a lot of whiskey producers, especially here in the United States, really take the other sort of approach and try to cycle or pump the barrels on a much more frequent basis by changing the temperature. You don't. Why is that? And what do you find beneficial about keeping the temperatures more constant?
Well, I think you mentioned it during your presentation. I thought you said it well. So you don't mind me quoting Dan Farber or Dan Farber. You mentioned the fact that we're not looking for the liquid to really try to get into the barrel, then out of the barrel on a daily basis, and really try to extract all that oak out, because we're not looking for. Brandy is not how aggressive can I be in my oak regime to knock you over with as much wood as physically possible. It's that, how do I get the right oak and the right balance with the fruit to really end up being an expression that can really complement. I mean, Mike talked about the history of brandy, and the one thing that I on the West Coast, if you were on the West Coast before 1920 and you had an old fashioned, a mint julep, those were brandy drinks. And if you've ever had an old fashioned with brandy, you get a much more, you get a much different drink, and you can see the finesse and you see the fruit coming through. So that's why I think is why we're not trying to shoot for just beat somebody over the head with personal take, that's not as much what I'm shooting for on brandy. With oak, that's not what I look for at brandy. I know that we had another presentation that was looking more for a oak forward brandy. That's just not our style.
Now, speaking of fruit, a couple years ago, I had the pleasure of tasting some of your I don't know whether it was experimental or just small batch, but there was some Grenache that was like stunningly fruity, like it was a pink grapefruit bomb. Like, what have you done recently? Not necessarily with Grenache, but I know you guys are doing a bunch of different trials now. You have such a rich resource of vineyards to draw from. Is there anything that you can tell us about that you're particularly excited about?
Sure, I'm going to sit down real fast. I'm going to show you that like these are the new barrels. So in case you guys are wondering what the, if I can get the camera through, we just got our barrel. We're prepping all of our barrels here for fills after our alembic runs this fall. We were working on getting our inventory at the our older inventory right, because if you're going to prioritize, once again, if you're going to try to making sure you get the right balance, the first thing you have to do is prioritize the stuff that needs to come out of oak before you prioritize putting stuff into oak, because you don't want to get behind. Getting behind is just, that's like adding 5+ years to, I'm going to need to age this out forever in order to get that mistake.
Or you end up with a cellar like Dan's where you just don't want to get rid of anything ever then. He's like, well, I really like making it and I'm really not that interested in selling it. It's nice to just have.
So
hey, how big are those new barrels, David? Those look.
Those are cognacs. Those are 92 gallons. So, and let's say cognacs are referencing the size of the barrel in our industry, not the fact that they once had cognac in them. Those are brand new barrels, French oak. Both one of our coopers actually builds them in France. One of them is a French company that also built them up in Sonoma. We actually worked with them to make it so they knew how to build 92-gallon barrels in Sonoma, because they're used to only building wine barrels that are about 70 gallons up there.
I didn't know they were building that format barrel up there, but I do now.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want, Dan, give me a call. You know my number well, and I'll tell you which folks that we worked with in order to try to build the 92s.
Backroom barrel dealings.
So Dan's question to me was, what are we doing that's fun, unique, and interesting? Is that paraphrased well?
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys have a wider variety of vineyards than any winery maybe in the world to draw from to experiment with, with brandy. So I mean, to me, to sort of pick your brain as to what you found that's really interesting and novel is a great question.
Well, you did touch on one of the things that we are working towards. Grenache was a huge element of our continuous distillation fruit sourcing historically. We're finding that that and Barbera were two things that Giulio Gallo loved to have distilled. We have tried both on the alambics. We definitely are much more excited about Grenache. So I would say when we're looking at the future of Argonaut, and I'm guessing it's going to find its way into Germain Ribbon. Hubert was actually interested in some of the stuff we were making on the Grenache side, which we originally weren't thinking it was going to, and he said, "No, let me taste that with you again." So we think there's some really good things there. We're excited about. I could tell you all the things we did that didn't work. That's also a long list. We tried Touriga. I wouldn't try Touriga if you're looking.
That's an interesting point, right? Not all grapes work.
Well, this is a good tie-in to some of the things that is a little bit of the backbone of where Dan is trying to shift. What is amongst the other things Dan's trying to shift where you're going with Osacalis is, have you guys played with, because you have this, have you played with planting anything in the recent past specific to brandy production versus drawing upon the resources you have for wine production? And have you tried to plant or look for plantings of what would be considered more traditional brandy grapes in France, like Montiel and full blanche and things like that maybe aren't around.
Wait. They have almost everything that anybody else in California and the world has. I mean, they have like the largest collection of grapes of anybody. So I mean, he could probably hold on one hand the number of grapes they don't have.
I did have a harvest where I fermented, I think it was 10 grapes that started the letter T.
So how does Geraldigo work then?
It's a good question, and the jury's a little bit out on that. I'm willing to say how the Tariga Dins, the Geraldigo, we've been playing around with that at our 1 gallon level. We had one harvest we liked and one harvest that we didn't like. So we're gonna keep probably that at a smaller scale. The other things that we're pretty excited about is we tried Pinot Noir from just about every major region of California. Obviously, the historically went with the Anderson Valley and the greater Mendocino. We also did Sonoma Coast. We went down the San Lucia Highlands. We went down to Santa Barbara. We went a little inland. So we've tried, that's why I think that, you know, when Dan asked me, what are we doing that's fun? I would say we've chosen a few grapes and then tried moving around the state and at different scales, tried figuring out, like at first we're usually working at a 10-gallon scale, but in the case of the Pinot Noir, since we believe so much in Pinot, we actually did all those at our production scale.
Anything Santa Cruz Mountain?
You know what? I did not manage to source anything from the Santa Cruz Mountains. I knew somebody else who's trying to grow the Pinot there, and I didn't want to. That's his area, and I don't need to encroach on it too much.
No,
I don't want to start a street fight over Pinot Noir in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Sonoma Coast is interesting, right? But I'm interested in what you're finding across California with Pinot.
You know, actually, Dan, you're I think going to be pretty excited. Our favorite two regions were actually you know, the Monterey region, which is very similar to right where you are right there. And we did love the Mendocino region. So, you know, I mean, you know, it wasn't that Hubert knew what he's doing, right? So we did find that Sonoma is an interesting one. The Sonoma ones that we worked on, I'm gonna want to see how they age. Mm-hmm. They did not. They came off the still much more tighter than all the rest of them. But if as we've been letting them age now, we've been starting to see we've been starting to see it open up a little differently than the rest of them. So the jury's still out on which way that one's going to go.
But that's okay too, right? Because when you talk, I mean, and we talked about with Dan, and then we talked about when we were actually helping. But you don't, like, the eau de vie that you would drink as an eau de vie isn't necessarily the eau de vie that you're putting in wood to age, because you have to a certain extent, extrapolate what's going to happen over the course of time.
Agreed. So, I mean, that's why we did the Pinot Noir at scale, because the only way you really figure out how something's going to age out in barrel is put it in a barrel, and not a small barrel. Put it in you gotta make 80 gallons of distillate, and then you know, get it to the right proof volume, you know, and get your 95 plus gallons and get it into a barrel if you really want to see what's happening. So
David, that's also planning for success, and that's 20 plus years of experience. It's, you know, it's frustrating, I think, as a consumer of anything, when it's like, it's super cool to get that one off and only 250 bottles are going to exist. But then you're like, it has to be crazy expensive because it's a one-off, and then you don't want to open it and drink it because it's a one-off. And like, when you get that intended, not intended, when you get that beautiful result, you look back then and go, oh, it's going to be 20 years again before we can have this. So that's experience leading into that long-term plan for success. Definitely.
That's the goal, is to I mean, I'm not going to tell you, as you know, Monique, you got to make an early read at some point. So maybe 3 years in, you kind of have to start guessing one way or the other. But, you know, as Dan said, you with our XO, you know, we're minimum age we're planning on having on that label is going to be 12 years, right? So that's minimum barrel age. Right now, honestly, it's older than that. We're having some issues with some records of Rat 8 and Mendocino. So I can't prove a certain amount of barrel age over small period of time on one of the blends. So we couldn't fully make that claim, but outside of that, it's pretty much 12 plus, more closer to 18 years old. And that, as you said, you got to be planning long times ahead. Hubert says, one of my favorite lines, I'm making the brandy for my grandchildren, right? And you have to have that mentality. You have to have that mentality of it's the long run game. And as much as I know that Pat was giving Dan a rough time about his comments earlier, yeah, I can understand the balance when I'm talking to Binnies. Yes, I have to have product for you all to sell, but we also have to be planning for, how do we get better, and how do you do that in the long range? So how do you make sure it's not a one-off that, once again, I got to go, as Monique just said, I got to go spend 20 years to go figure out if I got lucky, if, as my freshman year biology teacher said, was the wolf howling at the moon just the right way that way, and that affected something that you never knew about? Or was it truly like repeatable year in, year out by the way the grapes grow? And that's some of the stuff that we're working on. That's why we do, as I said, some of the 1 gallon work where we go, okay, what's this like? Yeah, 3 years in a row, this has produced good enough distillate. Now let's take that up and make 2 barrels of it. And after we make 2 barrels of it, now let's go figure out what 15 barrels of it tastes like. And at some point you'll get to scale, but it's going to take a while. And as a result, you have to be enjoying the journey as much as the current spot you're in.
David, I had a couple grape questions that's kind of similar to what you're talking about. Can you even pin down a single varietal that you would say has been the easiest or the most predictable for you to work with as a distiller, or maybe one that's been toughest and that you've gotten like this huge range of results from, even though you're working with the same varietal?
I think some of that has to do with growing region, and certain varietals tend to want to crop heavy. Another thing that I think Dan and Hubert agree on that I'm not as bought in on yet is French Columbard.
Okay.
Because I've watched French Columbard. As a winemaker, before I was making distillate, French Columbard loves to produce grapes out in the vineyard, right? So you got to figure out how to tame that kind of beast in the vineyard, or else the variability of the intensity of the flavor in your distillate is right there. So while I love the grape, we use lots and lots of it for the absolute premium repeatability of it. That requires a whole lot of management, and you got to change your viticultural practice based on the season, probably more than some other grapes. Another one that I'm thinking is more difficult. I think the florals are actually, they're in some ways the easiest, but they're in some ways the most difficult in that they can be so potent. Like a Gewürztraminer, like I put 3% Gewürztraminer in the blend, and suddenly the whole blend tastes like Gewürztraminer, right? So you need to figure out how you're trying to put nuance in your blend. So you try to figure out, how do I do nuance, both how do I make it right, how do I make it consistent, how do I make the best I can, and then how do I do this such that it works with the rest of the fruit that we're working on. So it's both it's an exercise all the way from the growing all the way through the blending stage as to how to make it so that way you're not like, look, do I like Gewürztraminer? I do. I happen to really like Gewürztraminer, but do I want all my distillates tasting like it? No, that's not what I'm looking for. So, I think that the figuring out how to get balance is a fun challenge. So those are the first two things that came to mind.
Okay, and a kind of follow-up that I don't know if it's even possible to answer. Dan alluded to it earlier. I mean, you're distilling brandies for what is like the world's largest wine company, right? Do you have a a property or a region that you've that you always go back to when you have grapes available? If you get an email that says, hey, we're going to have a lot from this vineyard or from this block of vineyards available to you for distillation, is there something that really gets you excited about that you're always kind of looking forward to if it's available?
Varietally, I think I've got an area that I get excited about for each variety. The Central Coast is the Monterey area for Riesling and Pinot, as an example, are things that those get
earlier, yeah.
Those get me really excited. But equally so, Viognier from Lodi, because what we're trying to Viognier is the one fruit that's like really, really different than most of everything else. I would say not. There's a couple others we do this with, but Viognier, unlike, well, I gave you we're picking very early everything else. You don't pick Viognier early. We pick Viognier late because we want the peach aroma that comes from Viognier actually comes from a very, very mature Viognier. So like that's one where you need actually the fruit to actually see some heat to actually develop into the characteristics that deliver that really ripe peach characteristic that we're looking for. So that would be an example of one where I'm looking for a little bit of a warmer area. The
also
Semillon,
super interesting, because wouldn't it be that somebody would say, oh, if we picked it at this particular time, it's great for wine. But if you said, no, wait, there's going to be this big like blast of heat next week. Now I don't use it for wine. I want that for distillation.
well, we're not, that I can see how that might have come across that way. We're really trying to tell the grower how to grow the grape for the desired, end usage. So even if there's a big heat wave coming up, what we've done a lot of work as Gallo as viticulture studies. My top two viticulture professors in college, or two of the top ones I had that when I got my master's degree, both now work for Gallo. So we've got some folks that can do some research, and we have shown that to prep for that, you can water the vineyard pretty hard in the fall, which is the old tradition was you didn't do that at all. But if you do that, it actually can really get it's like you're getting ready for the marathon. You want to make sure you drink some water before the race, right? So, and we're doing a lot of work to be able to say, how do we grow this grape for the intended purpose throughout the entire year? And then how do you deal with risk? How do you deal with the risk of early spring rain? How do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with this? But still, how do you get to intended purpose? The nice thing about being part of Gallo, I'll be honest, is if it all does mess up, we do have we do have wine and brandy products from you can buy for $3 a bottle up to products that you're buying for $1,000 a bottle, and
right.
So the thousand
right. What you do for Wisconsin and Minnesota, and then what you do for everybody else.
Well, I also just really like the idea of having all these amazing resources, super sharp peer people with probably hundreds of years in total of experience, meaning that you're less reactive. There's a little mitigation kind of all along the way, which is really fascinating.
You're utilizing the resources. In other words, it's not just like you have it, but you're actually very, very tightly utilizing them. Yeah,
we have some folks whose sole job is to actually take our researchers' findings and then translate them to our vineyards and our growers' vineyards. Right. So, I mean, we have grower relations reps, and every winery does, but they usually deal with more the general. Here's the contract, and here's what we want you to do as a general rule of thumb. But like when there's problems, we have PhD problem specialists who literally go in and can say, okay, hey, I hear you're having a problem. I'm here at your vineyard. Let's talk about what you could be doing differently. As a rule of thumb, here's how you don't get there, and here's what you do next. So here's what you do now next, and in the future, here's how you don't get here, right? And we've got a whole group of people that are like that. So it's very fun to have the resources to be able to help out not only our own growers, but also not only our own vineyards, but also the growers we work with. A lot of our growers have had I still remember the first vineyard where I met an owner of a vineyard when I was a winemaker, and I was out deciding whether we were going to pick his stuff. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I just want to tell you that the vine that you're tasting from, I personally planted with Giulio Gallo.
That's a flex.
He's like, I still, we're at the one edge of this vineyard, and he's like, I still remember the day we literally had shovels in our hand, and he planted the first few vines with me and talked about how he really wanted me to grow these grapes. And you guys have supported me every step of the way, you know, and it's now, like, golly, he told me that, and that vineyard was, I think, 35 years old at the time.
Wow.
And, you know, we had been sourcing that vineyard every year since apparently Giulio helped plant a couple vines in it, right? And that's how our vineyard relationships tend to work. We have many multi-decade grape growers that we partner with and we replant with, and we just, it's a long partnership. You know, I think Dan will tell you, our industry is not, you guys, we talk about, you guys can talk about the size of Gallo, but overall, we're an industry that really does care about each other and really has a lot of support for each other. And, you know, I've jokingly said, Dan, anytime you want to show up, not jokingly meaning it, but like anytime you want to show up, you're willing to come taste any of our experiments. Like, let's talk what we've learned. I've said the same thing. Another great distillery that is on the up and coming is Bethel Road.
This fall, I don't know what happened. Like it's just like I was rip roaring and ready to go, but like it just never arrived.
And you suddenly had the time for what?
I had tons of time. But just maybe to clarify a small point here, like the distillery, you as a brandy producer, you really have access to all that. It's not just on the wine side, right? So all those vineyards that Gallo has, like you
and
really
expertise.
You get to pick and choose in many cases as to what you want to use for brandy. It's not something that's just sort of, you don't have a short list of only these vineyards are available for brandy production. You know, it's really whatever you can dream of, I would imagine, is a possibility, at least within your organization.
I would definitely say, you know, on the E&J side, from a cost perspective, the list is a lot smaller. I'm not going to tell you differently. So, you know, I mean, we have to figure out how to deliver value at every level, but I can't deliver unbelievable, like a non-profitable at all value. But to your point on the brandy side, yeah, we have, you know, for our Germain Ribbon XO, it's pretty much the discussion is what would make the best distillate, and that's where the discussion starts, and that's where the discussion ends. Wow. Like we talk about it. I mean, we as a company, we own a winery called Talbot that happens to have a couple really Sleepy Hollow is one of our Pinot Noir vineyards. I can't take Talbot Sleepy Hollow, so Talbot doesn't have any fruit, but you know, we have the ability to source from, you know, some of those vineyards and some of the partner vineyards that, you know, our top Talbot Pinot Noir is coming from. And I've said, hey, I'd like to pull this corner of this vineyard, and how about this? We'd like to grow this differently. And we're constantly doing that to try to say, this is the best, this is literally, we think, the best vineyard that we can make distillate from this year.
Makes making good brandy a little bit easier, I would guess.
It's what made Hubert decide to work with us again. I mean, honestly, he and his co-founder had not necessarily gotten along for a little while before we bought the brand. And I met with Hubert, and he said, "What's your goal?" And I said, "Simple, make the best brandy in the world." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, if that's your goal, I'm in. That will remain our goal. You know, I mean, as well as we can." And then once again, I don't want to, it may sound like I'm being ultra competitive. I still say everything I said before about, and I'd love to have Farber come in, and I'd love to have folks so we all learn together, because you know what? This industry is making some great stuff, and we just hope that people will get a chance to put their lips on it and go, this is what this product's meant to be, and this is what I want to keep buying. And that's
Well,
that's
and
all of
that's
our
why
goal.
we started this whole. That's why we started this whole series, because we started this whole series to make an attempt to correct the perception that you can't get excellent, elegant, world-class brandy from the United States, or if that's not the perception, to make people think about what you can get from the United States and the fact that all these good and best practices are used here as well.
And
I mean,
it's some of the best practices are also, as you guys have also covered, they've evolved because we are different here than they are there. And we all have our own disagreements, and we'll have fun with learning from each other. I mean, you mentioned, do I have the ability to source all the different French grapes? Yeah, we have some research. We have some research plots that have probably some of the most wide variety of varietal selections available. But I keep going back to things like Semillon, and Sauv Blanc, and Grenache, and Pinot Noir, because I do truly feel that those make the best distillate, especially the way we grow it in California and the distillate you can make in California. That is very hard to repeat anywhere else, and that's what my belief is, and that's what makes coming into work every day so exciting.
You get that California brandy regulation and designation done then.
Absolutely.
But I would also say that, I don't know why, but I mean, the culture of California brandy producers has always been super collaborative. And you're talking right now about the smallest brandy producer in California, the largest brandy producer in California. Mm-hmm. And we've, had a chance to visit each other's facilities, to spend time in vineyards or distilleries mm-hmm. together, and actually, exchange juice and ideas. So it's interesting. The community of brandy producers, it truly is very collaborative. That organically arrived, but you see it every day.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked together with Marco from Chardonnay. Dan and I have talked with Paul Evanenon from Corbel. We've worked with O'Neill. I've worked with Bethel Road down in Paso Robles. They're great folks down there. I think they're an up and coming distillery. So we're happy to, work with each other. As I said, the old expression was rising tides raises all ships, right? Horrible in expression, so if I got all the words of that one correct, but that was something that's something that Giulio Gallo was really ardent about in the wine industry over many, many years. And we just truly hold that, the family holds that true in the brandy industry. We see this as the long-term battle, but it's a battle that ultimately we all hope that the California producers all have the product to win in the long run.
Nice. I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, this juice is great. I don't know what, I know we didn't really talk about individual SKUs, but I was tasting a couple Argonauts while we were talking through this whole thing, which I've loved since they launched. I love how fruity they are. I love how ripe, and, you had mentioned peach and kind of tropical earlier. I think these are great.
Do you want me to just give a quick, literally do a rundown of the five that I have in front of me, just like what they are and why people might like them, what the difference is between them?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I guess I have 6 in front of me. So this is saloon strength. So this is our 91 proof. Generally, it's almost all column distilled material. It is designed with a little bit more of an oak forward note on it in order to try to make it more of a cocktail brandy. It is not the bourbon oak forward note as much as the Copper and Kings discussion we had. As I said, we're trying to shoot for a different part of the characteristic that we're getting off of our bourbon barrels and the usage of what we're using. This is our speculator. Our speculator is, this actually has some, you guys talked about this before, it's a blend of 3-year-old all the way through 18-year-old brandy. What we're trying to do is really, our speculator is more of our column distillate, like where we like to give the analogy of, it's like lighting, where the column distillate can be the spotlight of particular fruit notes you want, and the alembic distillate can be the background lighting. a great play. You can have a great play where you only have one or the other type of lighting. It's a little harder if you just had spotlights, but to really put it all together and really all come together, what we like to about Argonaut series is we really try to emphasize different things. So this is a little more of the spotlight forward, the fruit forward brandy characteristics. Think of a lot of apple notes. This has generally some Chardonnay, a lot of French Columbard, a little bit of the Grenache. So it gets a little bit of that red fruit characteristic coming through on it. This is our Argonaut Fat Thumb. The names all have to deal with like the gold rush. And when you used to pay people on the gold rush, a pinch of, they'd take a pinch of gold flakes, and the most profitable sellers were, merchants were the people with fat thumbs. So that's, they told me I had a fat thumb because I wanted to put 60% alembic distillate into this one. So this is much more of our alembic, rounded in the mouth with highlights of that fruit a little bit more in the background. That's what makes our fat thumb a little more unique. Once again, grape-wise, we have a little bit more of the Grenache in there, but it's primarily Grenache and Columbard with a little bit of a red blend characteristic in there. I'm going to skip this one because I think
that's the one we don't have. What's that one called?
Those are the three. The three that you just covered are the three that are available in Illinois right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is coming. This is Argonaut's. This is the claim. So this was our. This is basically our top end, primarily column distillate. So this is that Grenache that Grenache and Zin that are both 18 year. The Zin was 17 years old. The Grenache is 16 years old, and there's a 25-year-old Barbera in there. Those are all continuous. And then on the alembic pot, there's some different mixed white characteristics in there, primarily Louis Blanc.
Nice. Looking forward to trying that one. After you've hyped up those grapes, that sounds excellent.
This is the Germain Ribbon. This is what we just call our core SKU. So it's 7 years aged. This is the one that is much of our two Germain Ribbons. This is the one that is more of our fruit forward one. It's more of our white fruit as well, with a little bit of floral characters. As I said, it has a little bit more of the Riesling in the Viognier. The Viognier brings the peach. The Riesling brings a little bit of a lifted fruit note, a nice oily characteristic, primarily French Columbard, with a little bit of Semillon to balance the palate weight out as well.
Did that one used to be called Craft Method, or was Craft Method a different blend?
Craft Method was a lower tier. This was actually, this is more done in the style of what used to be called Coast Road.
Okay, I remember Coast Road, yeah.
And then this is our XO. So Germain Ribbon XO. Once again, Pinot Noir with primarily Semillon as the back blender, but it's about 75 to 80% Pinot Noir, depending on the blend, but almost consistently in that range. It's designed to more have the red fruit characteristics match a much more older oak, more oak balancing it out. It's actually, as I said, right now it's we're going to have labels that'll say 12 years min age, but the current product is probably closer to 16, 17 years of age, and it's much more full, and you get a lot more of that rancio. So some of those leather smells on the nose, and a little bit more of the rich roundness in the palate. So
nice. Cheers, David. Thank you for joining us this week. I have the last of my fat thumb left. Well, I don't know what's left to talk about with Brandy, you guys. I don't know if we have to come back next Monday or what. We've kind of run the gamut here, I think. Dan's looking.
I mean, the only thing, well, I don't know. Let's think about this. The only thing, we never talked to Hubert. That would be kind of fun. Maybe we do a final wrap up with the future too, because what we need to do is, now that we've covered all the, broadly, I think we've covered all the bases of where we stand right now. Maybe then the next discussion is, where do we go in the next, 10 years, 20 years, because David just said it, they're not thinking, he's not doing anything for tomorrow, he's doing things for like a decade from now and 2 decades from now, because a lot of this stuff isn't going to go around. And we have the same perspective in terms of why we're doing this, because this is, you know, when we do a podcast or when we do an event like this, it's not, Benny's been around 72 years and we're hopefully around another 72. So what are we going to have on the shelf in the next 10 years? So food for thought.
Food for thought. Well, we'll think about what we can get together next week, but at the very least, audience, Brett and I will be back on Wednesday and Friday next week with a couple producer tastings from a Hawaiian distillery in Sagamore Rye next Friday, Brett. Which we
That's
have,
right.
We have a hand pick in an Armagnac barrel, actually.
I just want to say thank you for having me on one more time. It's just been a pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure was ours.
Join
This
you
was
guys.
amazing.
No.
I hope your
Yeah,
parents are proud,
apologize
Dave.
Well, I apologize too that we're not bringing you in early, because just so you know, David, you were actually part of the conversation when we were all sort of, the 4 of us were kind of brainstorming this a little bit as what's our next educational series going to be. It was kind of in the thumbnail sketch laid out. It just
We had to save
took me a
David
little
for
bit. It took
for
me
like
a little.
the
It took me-
modern. You're like the
Yeah.
core
Right.
of the modern.
Well, it also took me too long to ask and give everybody a heads up that we're going. I was usually saying, hey, what do we want to do next week? We want to do this. Well, I should probably get a hold of those people and tell them we would like to talk to them. So, but thank you for doing this on pretty quick notice.
Yeah. Appreciate it,
My
Dave.
pleasure.
Good to
Everybody,
see
thanks
you.
for tuning in. And yeah, nice to see all of you. And we'll see you next time, all right? Cheers, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Danny.